Now, albinism is a hereditary condition that causes little or no pigmentation in people's eyes, skin, or hair. In some parts of Africa, it's estimated to affect as many as 1 in every 1,000 people. Albinos struggle with poor eyesight, and in Nigeria, as in the rest of Africa, are much more prone to skin cancer and have shorter life expectancy. Sadly, they also have to contend with stigma and discrimination, as in many African societies, they are seen as bearers of bad luck. Often, albino people are abandoned at birth and are shunned throughout their lives. Well, recently, Nigeria's albino community launched yet another national campaign to end discrimination against them and to try to get people, particularly those in the rural areas, to understand that albinism is not an unnatural phenomenon. But what do we really know and think of albinism? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the author of Anyali, a new book about albinism in Nigeria, Professor Emeka Aniagolu. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So clearly, albinos in Nigeria are born different from the rest of the populace, with their sort of pale skin and eyes that can barely see, and that's just a fact. I mean, is there a sense that they were dealt a bad hand? Is that why there's so much stigma and discrimination against them? A sense that the condition is a sort of punishment?
Well, you know that the science behind albinism is relatively recent in terms of understanding the phenomenon. And I myself was very interested, as I have been. I've written about other things. I've written about the Osu in one of my earlier books. I've written about the problem the Igbos had about identical twins, ejima. And I was interested in delving into the social anthropology as well as the contemporary dynamics of the business of albinism in African society. Because much focus is obviously on the way blacks are treated in white society. And a lot of white people, because of the coincidence of that with modern industrialization, tended to equate that with some sort of notion of racial superiority. But it was interesting for me to find out how, without the phenomenon of white people, how in a homogeneous black society, people that looked whiter than even the so-called white people were treated in that society. So I was very interested in finding out that.
Yeah, so I mean, what is it then that causes people in those predominantly black societies to stigmatize them and discriminate against them? What did you find in your research?
Well, it goes back a long way. I mean, the book is a novel, so it's told in story form as opposed to a text, so that many more people will be drawn into identifying with the characters and so on and so forth. But the pure historical anthropology of it, because it's focused on Igbo culture, not that you don't have the same problem, but I'm more familiar with that, so I wanted to tap that. Because you know, for example, that in Tanzania and Burundi, they kill outright.
In fact, Tanzania is one of the worst in Africa.
They have almost well documented of at least 70 to 80 people that have been killed, their body parts dismembered and so forth and so on. It's not quite that bad here, but historically in Igbo society, they were discriminated against. They were considered freaks of nature, because for people who didn't understand how you can have somebody completely white from two perfectly dark-skinned people. And of course, their darting eyes and so on and so forth. So they used to be either sent away to the so-called evil forest with the rest of people like identical twins and so forth, or yoked to some shrine and oftentimes sold into slavery and so forth. Yeah.
But I mean, that's a very interesting point, because I mean, I'm wondering why there are these cultural myths and superstitions about them. As you said, in places like Tanzania, they're often actually killed. I mean, hunted down. They're used in magic potions, and apparently there's a lucrative trade in albino body parts. So it's a kind of dual association. On the one hand, they're seen as bad. on the other hand, they're seen as bringing good luck by some societies.
Yeah, but almost always those so-called magical things are always followed by these kind of senseless dualisms. I mean, killing somebody is murder, but then he said that the shrine or something requires someone's blood. So people do that in instances where it happens. But the book is focused on Nigeria, and they are not killed here outright.
Right.
But there is sort of more or less the social equivalent of that type of thing. Many of them, people don't want to get married to them. People have all kinds of notions about what albinism is in terms of, based on the ignorance of the science of it, and treat them based on that. And because they actually do have actual medical problems.
Absolutely.
And those medical problems can create handicaps for them, like being careful with the sun, or their eyes not being able to see well. Many of them have short vision and so forth and so on. It tends to retard their ability to be employed, to go to school, and so on, even though a lot of them are highly intelligent. And if the circumstances were created, would do quite well, just like anybody else.
So how are they fighting back against that discrimination? I mean, we've seen them conduct what they call sort of anti-discrimination campaigns several times in Nigeria. What's the way in which they're trying to fight back against that?
Well, I know because I am working with the Albino Foundation, because they're aware of this book coming out and so forth, and I'm excited about it as well. They're trying what organizations of that nature do to educate people about what albinism really is, and not to have it mystified into some, superstitious something or other. They are trying to make people aware, and to also make the albinos aware of the resources available to them. Because a lot of people who suffer from albinism, or families that have children that are albinos, don't know where to turn and what to do. Many of them can't afford the necessary sunscreens and so on and so forth to protect their skin. So they do a wonderful job educating people, as well as trying to inform albinos of how they can get help and assistance.
So basically demonized by the ignorant, prized by the superstitious, often sort of treated with scorn and ostracized, but they're fighting back. Is that the thrust of your book, or how is it told?
No, the book is focused on a specific character, because when you tell a story in the form of a novel, people can identify with the lives and personality and character of individuals. And if it's something that's reflected in their lives, then you can smuggle in education and entertainment and so on. But part of what I wanted to do was not just to write an expose on the problem of albinos and what albinism is all about. I also wanted to humanize them, because they don't just fall out of the clear blue sky. They are born by so-called normal people. And they are, in all other respects, other than their albinism, normal people. So they have the same emotions, the same desires, needs, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to contextualize that humanity in such a way that somebody who is not an albino will identify with the character, with their motivations and their desires and their needs. And somebody who is an albino can say, my God, this guy got it right about how I feel about X, Y, or Z. And that was the objective. In the cause of it, there's a lot of educating information about albinism and a lot of attempts to create a complexity of contradictions where you not just plead the case of the albino, but also humanize the albino by seeing their own frailties as human beings.
Sounds really interesting. And you talked about something very important at the outset, which was a little bit more academic, when you talked about making comparisons between white society.
Yes.
And what did you find in that respect?
Well, obviously, nobody ever mobilized albinos, or albinos, as Americans call them, mobilized them to turn them into a workforce, simply because they are different, in quotes, as antebellum slavery obviously became organized around so-called racial difference. And that may well be because capitalism did not originate from here. But nobody ever said, we're going to mobilize these people, put them to work, use them, and set them apart. There is a legend, very old legend in Igbo culture, that there was a time they were ostracized, some of them. And I talk about it in the book. It's interesting, but they were never collectivized and mistreated as a consequence of it. Because as you can imagine, a lot of the people that were the parents and siblings of albinos love them. So even if society has these strange notions about them, the people that know them and that they are parents want to protect them at the same time. So there's some of that tension as well, and it's captured in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds really interesting. I was reading earlier in the day about this Indian woman, because, I mean, albinism occurs in different parts of the world.
Most of it is from Africans, black people. But it does occur everywhere, you're correct.
But it was a fascinating story where she was talking about how her mother rejected her and all that, and just couldn't deal with the fact that she was different, and you know. But that's another story. I mean, the point is that the hope is that the book that you've written will in some ways lessen the mystery around them and make them more accessible as human beings.
Definitely. I'm sure it will, because it's, I've been told, it's a hell of a read. Like, there's a friend of mine who...
Well, if you might say so.
Indeed.
But I mean, when can we expect to see it on the shelves?
Originally, it was supposed to be launched on the 10th of this month, but it had to be postponed to October 1.
Right.
October 1, which is a Friday.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing it.
Thank you very much.
Professor Emeka Aniagolu, thank you very much.